start the presentation, eh? So, there we go. Okay. Yeah. All right.
Just make sure I share the screen.
Cool. All right.
Okay. All right. Perfect. So today I'll be doing a presentation about what the future of education looks like and how we can really think about transforming the learning process. And the reason that I chose this topic is that I think education is one of the core foundations of our society. It teaches us about different languages. It teaches us about history of wherever we're living, math, science, and arts. And right now we're seeing a huge explosion in terms of technology that is changing the workforce and the demands of the workforce and the employers that we're applying for, but not so much in terms of our education process and how we're delivering our education to people, mainly in primary schools. So just trying to arrange my screen here. So what I'm going to be covering today is looking at what education looks like right now and where it came from, looking at education of the future and potentially the use of AI and machine learning, and also how cybernetics can play a role, which is what I'm more excited to talk about because it's a bit different, how the roles of teachers will change in the future. And also, of course, whenever we're talking about technology, it's important to think about what the ethical considerations are in terms of scaling this to all countries. So to start off with, what is education like today? Right now, the way that I kind of see it is that there's a tension between how quickly our technology is advancing versus the ability of our education systems to actually keep up with it. So I'll talk a little bit about the origins of the education system and then also what the flaws are and why I don't think it's necessarily working as best as it could. So I'm going to pose a question to the class since I guess I have more time today. What do you think is the purpose of education? And from your experience, like, what do you think it means?
I can begin.
Yeah, Eduardo.
The purpose currently is just to make people be more open-minded and accept, whatever information comes into their way, but to analyze this information objectively. That's I think the ultimate purpose. And then based on that analysis, decide what's, information to keep or to discard. There we go.
Awesome. Thank you. That's actually
I'll
great.
sort of jump off of what Eduardo said. I think that age-old analogy of teach someone to fish versus giving them the fish. I think that's sort of the same concept within education, is how to teach an individual how to learn for themselves, how to think critically, how to approach situations instead of just rote memorization sort of, and learning for the sake of an exam just to purge all the information the night after.
Yeah, basically. Anyone else?
I was going to say around the same thing as Eduardo and Joel, but also learning skills like teamwork and how to work with difficult people, I think, is another important aspect of education.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you all for your answers. So that actually touches on a lot of the points that I'll bring up again later in the presentation. This is one of the quotes that I found through my research, is that the purpose of education is demonstrating a true understanding of the material through applying it in a simulation or even in a real life situation, rather than kind of the rote learning that Joel just mentioned in terms of cramming a bunch of information and absolutely forgetting all of it the day after. And it's also about the skills and the attitudes that you demonstrate through the process. So kind of more so what Caitlin mentioned in terms of how do you work with others, especially when you're working with different people. So what are the skills and the attitudes that you demonstrate throughout this entire process? So that's kind of how we're going to frame this presentation in terms of the purpose of education, is really being able to take what you're learning in class and apply it in reality and actually in the working world. So to kind of take a step back, the origin of our current education system, it was really about preparing children for kind of the industrial world, for working in factories, And that's where this current model comes from. But if you really think about it, jobs today didn't exist 20 years ago. We have software developers and engineers. We have people who are creating content for all the different social media platforms that have come out now. And we basically have an app for everything that we wanted to have an app for, like it exists. And those jobs just didn't really, like they didn't exist 20 years ago, or even if they did, it was at a completely different scale. So this is one of the bigger changes in terms of our education system, whether or not it's actually preparing us for these types of roles. As well, back then, the origin was to have an kind of like an 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. structure. And this is similar to if you think about factories where people had to get to their work on time, do as they were told, maybe like optimize their production or their output, and then at a certain time they would leave the factory. But now we're seeing, in terms of even when you're at work, especially in the face of COVID, we have a lot of flexible working arrangements where people are able to work when they want. They might not necessarily even have to go to the office. They can work from home. There are different obligations, and these are usually respected in terms of if you have children that you need to tend to, you can maybe get off work a little bit earlier and then go and pick them up. And so when we're thinking about the future education system, perhaps this type of strict structure of the time that you have to be at school will no longer exist, and it'll be more flexible as well, just to kind of mirror what the workplace looks like. And then lastly, in terms of what the current system teaches us, as Joel had mentioned, it largely focuses on pure knowledge transfer. So again, how many times have we all crammed for an exam? And then maybe like I wrote here like a few months later, but I feel like even a week later, we kind of forget some of the things that we had crammed into our brain. And that's just, it's not that useful. But if you think about it, we're shifting to an economy and to jobs that really require us to apply our knowledge and not just know a simple fact like the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell or something like that. It's really about actually being able to take what you've learned and apply it. So if you think about the purpose of education, to be able to demonstrate and apply our understanding, this one relates to this last point the most. And a lot of the times our application of the material comes through having to write an exam rather than actually having to apply it in a real life situation. So in that regard, there was a statistic that 63% of our students are disengaged during class time. So if our assessment system isn't working and students are also disengaged during class, how effective is it? Like, how effective is the current system to actually teach us what we need to know to apply it in the future, to get our jobs, to think critically, and to be more open-minded if we're not really paying attention in class? And so there's this quote by Scott Boland that there is a mismatch between how we teach and also how the brain learns. So I found this information, and if it's incorrect, someone can kind of jump in. But in terms of how our brains work when we are learning new things, it actually releases endorphins and dopamine. And these are the same chemicals that are released that make things actually more pleasurable and addictive as well. So if you think about it, that just means that the learning process itself is addictive and pleasurable, no matter how old you are, how young you are. When you're thinking about learning something new, it's actually very exciting and you want to keep doing that as well. But for a student, for example, who is behind in class, then for them, they're struggling all the time to keep up with the material. So how engaging is that process for them? But for someone who is incredibly ahead of the curve, but they're stuck in the same grade as everyone else, learning the same materials at the same pace, it's also disengaging for them because they don't feel as though they're learning as much as they could be or being challenged enough to actually like have those chemicals be released by their brain. And to compound on top of this, I'm sure we've all seen a version of the forgetting curve. And this is basically, we learn something and maybe one day later, we only remember around 50% of it is what that curve looks like. And as time goes on, we forget more and more and more of what we learn. And in a school system and in kind of like elementary, if you think about a student who is already behind and then they face the forgetting curve and then they go into the next grade and they start at a lower baseline than everyone else in their class, what happens to them? That kind of cycle keeps on happening if they're not no one's there to intervene and really give them the help that they need, and like really specify and tailor the teaching towards that student who might be behind. So in terms of why it isn't working right now, given those the last two slides I went over in terms of how the brain works, right now a lot of our schools are just using a one-size-fits-all model. And what this looks like is that you have one teacher for every 30 students, and then once you get into university, that's like an entire lecture hall, which is a lot more, which means there is a huge lack of personalization. So to kind of demonstrate the effects of personalization, there was one study that was done by a scientist where they did kind of 3 different sets of assessments. One where they had the 1 to 30 students, and they did one final assessment at the end of the study kind of duration. One, for the second one, they did frequent assessments to try to counter that forgetting curve. So they would kind of assess them every week or every 2 weeks. And then in the third one, they actually paired them with a personal tutor combined with those frequent assessments. And the last one there, where they had a personalized tutor, they actually, in their assessments, scored 2 standard deviations higher than the people who only had a one teacher for every 30 students. So this kind of demonstrates the power of having personalized teaching. Although it is infeasible at this moment, given, teachers are already like stretched thin, imagine being able to give each student a personalized teacher, or being able to replicate a similar process through using technology and AI in a sense where they're able to receive immediate feedback on their work and know exactly what to do next to kind of remediate some of the issues that are there. So, teachers are definitely overworked in this model, and even more so when it comes to COVID-19. They're being stretched even thinner for time right now, and it makes a lot of work for them to be doing this all. So it's kind of hard for them to teach the material and also be able to personalize their teaching towards students, even if that personalization is beneficial at the end in the long run. And the point of integrating technology in this kind of world is not to demand a full online class with absolutely no teachers, no interaction at all, because I feel like, or I would argue that the personal connection and the interaction is actually still crucial for students, especially when they're young, just because it's important to learn how to have that interpersonal kind of connection and how to talk to other people, whether those people are your peers or it's someone that is kind of older than you. And so the point of technology here is to curate a student's learning process and also to try to help free up teachers' time so that they actually have more time to do what they're good at, which is thinking more about tailoring the approach to how they're teaching materials to their students and being able to intervene when a student is behind on their material. So this is just kind of a question I thought of is, are we really future-proof then if we've grown up in this system? And I think we're all a lot more conscious about how we approach our careers, especially now in terms of like the skills that we want to gain. We're more aware of the skills that we want to gain. And right now, these are the skills that employers are looking for. And on the right, you see what the focus of schools are in terms of what they assess. Usually it's the verbal and linguistic skills. So kind of just the way that you're able to write or communicate with other people, and then kind of just the more logical and mathematical skills. But there are a lot of different other skills out there that are important and crucial as we move into a world where technology is pretty much taking over everything, and a lot of those more tactile and smaller tasks can be taken over by technology. So that was all kind of the stuff about right now, how our current education system is. In terms of what the future can look like, I wanted to kind of paint a picture of what it can look like before I jump into the details. So my prediction is that in the near future, we'll no longer be going to the classrooms to learn, and it's going to be a much more personalized type of approach and a more flexible approach. For example, when we're young, we still have that broader curriculum. Maybe we have more touch points with the teacher. There's a little bit more structure just so students who are younger can have like more structure in their life rather than kind of not having that. And then as you kind of go into junior high and high school is where you're able to have more flexibility in your schedule. And the AI and the machine learning is able to take all of the data that is collected throughout your elementary school to actually apply it and give you more curated and tailored learning material as you're progressing throughout your education. And I think that we will still go to the brick and mortar buildings to work on group projects and to really develop our skills in collaboration with people, because that's still important. But other than that, there's going to be a lot more flexibility in people's days to be able to pursue extracurriculars or whatever it is they're looking to do. That's kind of the more near future. In terms of looking even further is the idea of cybernetics. So this is something that was really interesting to me, because I was thinking, what if in the future we just have this chip in our brain and we're able to download an entire book or a database or some type of knowledge to our brain without having to cram, without having to study, without having to read over everything, and just have this, be able to access this at any time that we want. So what will this look like in the future? What are some of the implications of doing that? And how does that also shift the purpose of education and learning in the future? That's kind of the big picture view. We're seeing more emerging trends in terms of brick and mortar spaces being eliminated. So they're becoming spaces of collaboration and also spaces where you can go and receive more personalized coaching from teachers, especially if you're behind on your material. And there's also more of an elimination of the traditional 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. schedule. And there was a prediction that this would be gone by 2040, which, if you think about it, isn't that unrealistic, especially seeing as we've pushed everyone to remote learning with COVID-19. I think a lot of people now are realizing there are some things that can still stand. Even as we have the vaccine, even as people may still go back to the schools, there are some lessons to be learned here from this COVID-19 era in terms of moving into remote learning. As well, in terms of personalized learning, just quickly, what do you think of when you see these two logos? And how do you think it might, there's a lot of trends and things. I mean, how does it relate to personalized learning?
Learning, you say? I mean, Netflix does have a lot of documentaries that are extremely interesting, and sometimes I wonder if after watching those documentaries, their information is better retained than the information that I should be retaining from school, right? So that's a good it can be used as a good platform for learning.
Yeah.
Amazon, I use it mostly for purchasing, so I cannot comment on that.
I think in terms of the specialization properties of these two, it Netflix uses a whole algorithm that, it allows Netflix to determine, oh, you like this movie, so you might like this one. And I could see that same sort of idea being used in education. For Amazon, same sort of thing. They give you kind of the cross-selling aspects. So, oh, if you bought this before, then you might enjoy this, or here's an extra add-on that you can get for X amount of money. So I can see the basis of both being used in education for sure.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you for that. That actually ties in pretty well with what I was thinking, is using those algorithms to personalize materials for students. And imagine getting curated content. I know Amazon always recommends things that I don't even think I need, or I didn't even know existed. And that's kind of, imagine having an education system like that, where you get recommendations and you're like, oh, I actually would be interested in this and I didn't know about it. So we're seeing a lot more learning platforms kind of using data to personalize your learning, and Skillshare is one of them. It's more, I've been using it more to learn kind of creative arts and things related to photography, but they're pretty good at taking your data and recommending courses for you to take. And certainly there are things to take away, there are lessons to take away from each of these companies in terms of how we can apply personalized learning by using data of what people are interested in, or what they mean areas of improvement that they need. So this is what the forgetting curve looks like. And in terms of what personalized algorithms may do, is they could at first introduce a topic to you, you would learn about it, you would get assessed on it, and they would do spaced repetition to give you prompts to actually kind of re-jolt your memory. So each time you're kind of on that decline, they would do another assessment to kind of rejig your memory, and do that over time, just to make sure that the memory is actually retained and the information is retained. And they usually use active recall versus simply reading, which is honestly how I study sometimes, is just kind of like reading over the material. But if you use things like flashcards or you actually ask questions to yourself, then that's a more active way of remembering the information that you've learned as well. And so the algorithm would get immediate feedback and also give the student immediate feedback, and then also adjust the algorithm to keep tailoring that material to the student. So furthermore, if you think about all the different things that AI and technology are capable of, one thing is sound detection, and this can be used for learning languages or even playing musical instruments. So one of the cool examples that I saw was you could play a song, and then if you get a certain note wrong, they would configure the music sheets to kind of help you be able to get to the next step. So whether that be certain notes or certain rhythms or beats, or even dynamics of like having to play quieter or having to play louder music, as you think about moving through the different levels of even playing piano, which is what I've done, each level is a little bit harder, and the algorithm will be able to adjust for that skill level just based on how the input data that it gets. As well, you can use it for gesture recognition, and this would be useful for things like dancing, martial arts, as well as sign language. There's a lot of different gesture recognitions already where it's able to track your hands or track your body movements. So this would be really useful in terms of being able to give students feedback immediately on the creative things. Joel?
Am I able to ask a question, or?
Yeah, sure, go ahead. I don't know.
Yes.
Awesome. I'm curious about the gesture recognition. I think that is, we're seeing that more and more in technology, and you raised some really good points. But I'm wondering if gesture recognition through like Zoom meetings when you're in the classroom, and technology potentially being able to know how an individual is feeling or their emotional state. Because I know like a lot of communication, I think 80% of communication is nonverbal. What are your thoughts on that? And sort of, I guess, and maybe you're going to come to the ethics part
Yeah.
later on, but I'm just curious what you think about that in your readings.
Yeah, I didn't read about this, but I actually had a different software that my friend sent to me where it if you've done any like online interviews where it's a video recorded interview, they actually use similar technology to read what your face looks like. And even if your face, like you're not aware of it, they can tell whether you're like sad or whether you're happy and things like that. And I definitely think similar technologies can be applied, especially if you're thinking about if we're all virtual. And we know that during this time with COVID, there are a lot of people who are struggling with everything. And so being able to read kind of the body language of someone, even from like the chest up, and being able to tell what mental state they're in, that would be, I think that is possible, especially since a lot of our face kind of emotes most of the time, even if we're not aware of it. And I think that would be useful, and definitely I'll come to the ethics part a little bit later, but there are definitely concerns of doing that in terms of giving up your data and giving access to that, because even now I know with working with professors, they want students to turn their cameras on, but you can't like enforce that. You can encourage it, but you can't make it a mandatory thing as you have to have your camera on, just because it violates people's privacy and kind of their right to choose that for themselves. But yeah, thanks for the question. That was awesome. So, and then just a little bit of in terms of additional technologies, thinking about using virtual and augmented reality technology to do science experiments, and also having an immersive language learning experience. So for me, I went to Mexico a couple years ago, and I was able to learn Spanish just by being there. And my Spanish was better than French, which I had taken for 4 years. So 6 weeks compared to 4 years of learning, it really shows the impact of being immersed in an environment. So imagine being able to replicate this process with virtual or augmented reality. And with this, if kind of thinking about the ethics of allowing the technology to record your experience and being able to play it back, and flag certain things where or certain components of the video feed of where you can improve, and being able to notice, oh, this is maybe I have to pronounce this differently or do this specific skill differently. That's pretty valuable in terms of helping a student improve their skills, whether that be in their science experiments or their labs, or whether it be through their learning their languages as well. So about cybernetics, this is kind of more out there still. Like, it's a little bit trippy to think about sometimes, even for me. What happens when like you have a cognitive extender is what I found in my research, is that you can maybe improve your long-term memory. You can assign certain tags to the content in your brain. So similar to how we tag people in photos or tag certain things to make it more easily to search, you could potentially do this in your brain and be able to access those specific memories with a specific person, or about a certain place, or even about maybe a certain topic or a subject that you're learning about. You can also extend your comprehension and expression, so to be able to more effectively analyze maybe a film that you're watching or a book that you're reading, to really understand the context and the deeper meaning behind those. And also, one thing with machine learning is that we know that machine learning can split things into different categories. And so what the cognitive extender can potentially do is to help you form categories in your brain that you weren't even like aware of. So it makes it easier for you to search things up when you need to. And it's able to tag things more effectively and efficiently than you would have thought. The big thing here with cybernetics is this thought of cognitive atrophy. So what this means is when you actually remove the cognitive extender, what happens? Like, who are you? It's kind of a bit of an existential crisis, because if we're downloading all of this knowledge and all of this information, does that knowledge belong to us, or does it belong to the chip in our brain? And so cognitive atrophy, the other part of it, is to kind of make it feel more real, is imagine, as we're growing up through elementary and through school, we got used to and accustomed to using a calculator, because all the basic functions we already understood. And as you get into calculus, it's just a lot easier to have a calculator next to you. So imagine all of a sudden, like, you're sitting down for your exam and that's taken away from you and you just have to do it. Like, it's a bit of a daunting task to think about, but that's a little bit similar to how it feels to have these cognitive extenders taken away all of a sudden, and you're just left with who you are. So the implication with cybernetics is, as we move towards singularity, and where everything, as technology and AI become smarter than humans, the line between technological and human autonomy will blur, especially if we're integrated with the technology itself. So again, is our knowledge really ours, and what do we actually know? What thoughts are actually our own versus what is actually in the chip? And also thinking about, if you're making a decision, whose decision is it really? And it's all kind of trippy. I don't have an answer to this. As I was writing my paper and thinking about this, I just thought, there will continue to be people in society who choose to opt out of this because of these reasons, because they want to have that autonomy and feeling like who they are is fully who they are, rather than a very confusing combination of themselves and technology. And so there will be people who are more on the late adopters or even laggards of the adoption curve. But as we move towards this world, perhaps those people are left behind as well. So in terms of how the role of teachers will change, this is a bit quicker part to go over, but what I want to kind of emphasize is that I don't think that teachers are fully going to go away, just the same way that physicians help humans in terms of like human enhancement. Teachers are also there to enhance people's capabilities to think and to think critically and to work with the world around them. So I would argue that there's still a linchpin in society, especially for the communities that right now aren't able to afford all the technology that I've been talking about right now. So what they'll be doing is really providing that personalized support I was mentioning in terms of the children or students who are behind in class, being able to intervene and give them that support. They're there to frame all the different group projects, make sure that they're able to manage any team conflict that will for sure come up between group projects, as we've all experienced. And then also being able to give personal anecdotes and advice to students in terms of how to manage situations that may require more interpersonal skills, because those aren't things that machines can necessarily teach us, or certain tips that they found to be more efficient or more effective when completing a certain task. But something, you notice the black box that's on the screen. Before any of this happens, we need to make sure that the black box can be explained to teachers, because without that, it's really hard to onboard teachers to actually use the recommendations that the technology is giving them, or to really trust the technology at all if they have no idea what's going on behind that. So this is kind of the transition phase of how do we get from where we are today to where we will be in the future in terms of all the technology, all the personalized learning that we'll potentially have. And another part of the teacher's role is to think about how we are going to measure success in the future. So as I think Helen mentioned earlier, in terms of increasing importance of teamwork and collaboration and creativity and problem solving, all these things about working with other people are really crucial. So for example, I mentioned earlier where the school building can still be used for completing projects. And this will be really where the assessments kind of come in terms of looking at how students are completing their projects and completing their any of the group work that they have. So one of the quotes that stood out to me in my research was, imagine coming out of high school or even university, rather than just a simple resume of tasks that you've completed, you have an entire list of all these projects that you've completed that you can refer to, and you have tangible outputs from as well, that you can show people, this is a result of what I've done. And we're already moving there, but more so in the future when we're seeing less of a focus on the school building itself and more of a focus on being able to work together with other people. This is kind of the direction that we'd be heading in. So lastly, but obviously not least, are the ethical considerations. And I'll be talking about the impact on marginalized groups, data privacy issues, as well as determining responsibility when it comes to implementing these technologies. So when we think about the impact on marginalized groups, we're thinking about lower socioeconomic status communities where they're not able to afford these technologies in the first place, any financial barriers that they have, and especially the last part is the flawed or missing historical data, or any flawed or missing historical data, especially when you think about schools that may not have accurately tracked all of their information over time, and they're also from marginalized groups and communities. If we're feeding our algorithms flawed data, then our output is also going to be flawed, and it's going to have huge implications on those communities. So our algorithms are also biased, and we have to think about how this impacts them and whether or not this also enlarges the divide that we are already seeing in our society. And I think this is one of the most important things to consider when we're thinking about implementing technology in our education systems. And so, one of the recommendations, and one of the most common recommendations when it comes to trying to make sure that our algorithms are fair and representative, is to have diverse teams. But I would also kind of take it a step further to really look into the data and really understand where the biases are going to come from and where the flaws or any missing data is going to come from, because that's going to have large implications in the future. So next, in terms of protecting people's data, this would be looking into whether the systems and the processes are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, and whether it's protecting all of the data that's being collected, because there's always going to be people that are hacking systems and things like that. And that's really dangerous when it comes to, you have all this information about people, where they're at in terms of their schooling. And when we think about cybernetics, you have access to people's brains, technically. So that's a little bit kind of their intellectual property. So how do you protect all of that? And as well, when you think about protecting their data, you have parents that are making decisions on their children's behalf as well. So how does that play into who owns the data that they have? So my recommendation here is to make sure that school boards, auditors, and the government are all involved to make sure that the systems and the processes have integrity, that they're well protected, and there are always people there to monitor it, just to make sure that there are no people actually hacking it. And as we move towards technological singularity, I think the technology will just be able to do this on their own. But for now, when we're in the transition phase, it's kind of important that those people are all there. And in terms of parents making decisions on their children's behalf, I was thinking perhaps this could be similar to how certain decisions can be made up until a certain point. So for example, at the age of majority, everything is transferred towards that individual and they'll have full control over what they do with their own data, whether that be their personalized learning or whether that be cybernetics. So that's kind of my suggestion, is to have things mirrored in terms of the age of majority wherever they're living. And so this kind of protection, it will vary country to country, in the way that I see it, because people have different regulations and different thoughts and cultures that will dictate what they think is kind of applicable to the situation. And
Just
lastly,
have a question on that point, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So from the midterm, we talked about kind of like I don't remember the exact wording, but it was like, if the data gets into the wrong hands, what are we going to do? So with that and cybernetics, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I will kind of touch on it like in this slide as well, but I think the way that I kind of saw it, and I think of it as extrapolating like very far into the future, is that so in the meantime, I think we just need to figure out who is like have certain penalties in place, that the government would be able to step in and set out these guidelines and actually figure out who the responsible party is. So on the slide, you see, does the responsibility fall on teachers, the developers, or the parents? But also when you think about if someone's hacking into the system, then if they're able to identify who that is, then they would definitely have to be like, there would be certain judicial processes in place to address it. But the risk in all of that is the person's data who is being compromised. And I don't have an answer or a solution to that, because that, especially when it comes to cybernetics, like if your chip in your brain is hacked, like what happens? Like who has access to that knowledge? And not only that, like who are you without that chip? Again, if we think about cognitive atrophy. So I don't really have an answer to that, but it's definitely something that we can all keep in mind. But this kind of slide is just thinking about what happens when the technology does fail, or the algorithms are flawed and giving out input that doesn't make sense. So will it be the teachers, because they're the ones kind of doing applying the personalized recommendations that may be flawed? Will it be the developers who made this algorithm in the first place? Or will it be on the parents who may have signed a contract where they're taking the liability for any failures in the system of things? So the main thing here is that I think that governments need to step in. There needs to be some sort of guidelines of like how this will work and who will be responsible at the end of the day, and to really think about where like which clauses are needed in contracts, whether those are going to be signed, or just kind of thinking about where the responsibility lies, because that's going to be very important as we're all moving into this very technological advanced world. So in summary, we're seeing that technology advancements are outpacing education again, where we're really needing our education systems to catch up to where technology is. We're also seeing personalized and immersive learning as a future of education itself, and not only that, extending further into kind of cybernetics of being able to just like download things and be able to apply the knowledge in the future. The role of educators is really to provide additional and personalized support. So I argue that teachers are still going to be crucial in this entire process, at least for the time being. And then all the ethical things that we talked about, and the question that Kaylin asked that I couldn't answer about, where does the responsibility lie, especially when someone hacks into the system as well. So that's kind of the conclusion of my presentation. I have, if you have any questions for me, feel free to ask. I don't promise any answers, but I also have questions for you to think about, how, as we're moving into the future, these are certain things that I would be thinking about as well. So thank you for your time. I know I took a lot longer, but I also have this entire class. So thank you.
That was a great presentation. I also loved your slides. They were very concise, and the text was not overwhelming, which I really appreciate. There was a good balance in images and text. I wanted to extend on the teamwork using these technological platforms, because I would also like to see that maybe our future generations do team assignments with people all around the world. And by doing that, they would include the point of view of people that have a different background. And in turn, that could also lead to a decrease in bias, which, by the way, is my topic. So I'm happy that you began introducing it.
Nice.
So I see a lot of promise on these approaches, and I like that you still see the value of professors, because I align with you. I think that they are good guides for people that are like us, that we're in the process of becoming, of learning. So overall great presentation, and yeah, I like the topic.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments too. And I like the point about, seeing how we can work with people from other countries, because it is important to understand. Like when I was in Mexico, I was working with people from Colombia, Vietnam, and France. And it was the most jarring thing, just because everyone had very different like working styles and working habits, but it was also a lot of fun. And you see how all these different point of views kind of come together, and you're able to find a compromise and be able to work effectively together. And I think that's very important. And it not only decreases bias, but I also think it decreases the division that we're seeing in our society today, by bringing people kind of more to a mutual understanding of where others come from.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So other questions? One way to look at it is all of you would recognize in the recent past that we've really gone in a transition from the system being stupid, and you could count on it being stupid. So every day you're spending time teaching your word processing or computing system and email system how to spell words that everybody knows, and which words you really mean, where any idiot would know which, and suddenly sort of the other way, right? So like in EPIC, the current new medical information system, now you're dealing with a situation where the system always knows how to spell what you mean and knows more words than you do, and can suggest words that you don't even know what they are, but would actually fit what you're doing. And then when you take Gmail suggesting things to you, it goes beyond just like generic, okay, with this preceding text, trying to predict what you're going to say next, to looking at your whole life, right? So say, well, this morning you've been working on this, and so we think that your aim is this, so you're likely, and it gets potentially really creepy, right? Particularly if, for instance, you're not proud of what you're doing, or you're trying to be covert about it. You realize your computer knows so much about what you're doing, and how much of that is confined to your computer. It's just really interesting. So if you look at medicine and the way it's practiced, which from the name of this course, people, I think we talk about more, right? So in the recent past, communications in medicine were inferior to anything you would ever use in your personal life. a lot of communications were leaving voicemail, paging people, I mean, antiquated technologies that none of us are using personally, right? Now, suddenly all that's changed. We have secure messaging. So you can message other physicians securely anytime of the day or night. And that system is the one that always knows how to spell all the words and what would be the next logical word for you to use and so on. And so it is now true that the system is teaching you, that you learn things from the system. Whereas in the past, it was sapping your energy. You were teaching it things that were really stupid basic knowledge everybody knew, right?
Yeah,
So,
I was writing my paper and Google would suggest me like what to type next. I had to turn it off because it was just so like disorienting, because I had something that I wanted to type and then it would give me a recommendation, and even if it was better, it kind of like stopped my train of thought as I was writing because it kept popping up as I was typing. So I think it's interesting to see that in terms of, if we think about when, I don't even know if papers are going to be a thing in the future because technology is just going to write it all for us at this point.
right. Well, think about like Joel's talking about the importance of professors, but think about that. So think of frequently asked questions. Right now, they're text. You don't get an actual talking head, but in the future, like frequently asked questions are just that. They're questions that many people ask, right? So you could have like the best person in the world to answer that question. And it doesn't have to be live, right? It can be a recording. The best person in the world answering this question, and it would be really satisfying, and satisfying for millions of people potentially. So I mean, that kind of thing is obviously coming. So you have kind of the local yokel thing, right? That in the past, our society was such that we needed local people to do everything, right? And worlds were kind of limited by what people were locally. But now suppose your professors, all of them, none of them are the best in the world. Somebody offers you an opportunity, rather than learning from the local people, wouldn't you like to learn the same subjects from the best people in the world? And we've got metrics to show that these are the best people in the world. And it's actually practical to get them to teach you. So education could also change in that way, that there's certain things that are unique conversations you have with somebody teaching you, and they're not frequently asked questions. It's like first time in the history of the universe that anybody has ever asked this question you just asked. And there it is useful to have somebody locally, or at least somebody that you can direct that to. But I think you see what I mean, that the whole scaling kind of thing will likely change, where you don't need anywhere near the number of people teaching the same subjects that we currently have, because you can take the best people teaching those subjects, and in a sense, they can teach everybody in the world. It isn't live, but it's still satisfying. They can teach the basics. They can have accessible answers to frequently asked questions. So.
I think Joel has a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, well, first off, I have to say, Leanne, that was an incredible presentation. It was really interesting. I think there were just so many cool topics in there. Like, I don't even know where to start, but I think we can all be rest assured that we have the approval of Eduardo's bird. I think the lovebird was very focused on your entire presentation. So my question is really sort of, you touched upon the ethics part, and you all know I love the ethics conversations we've been having in this class, but how do we really ensure that the algorithms that are going to be used are indeed not flawed, from an ethical standpoint, when we're looking at, a lot of stuff that you were talking about? There's sort of the onus to code or create algorithms that have a certain outcome, but to a certain extent, it's really hard to predict how an outcome is going to be. So I know you sort of touched on this a little bit, but do you see any sort of metrics that could be used? I imagine that it'd be a very iterative process. I don't think people are going to get it 100% correct right up at front. So how do we ensure that as we're moving and progressing with a lot of these algorithms and technologies, that there's a very clearly defined feedback mechanism, so that if there is anything that's wrong, that you can change it right on the spot?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I was thinking, and I'm a very process-based type of person, so that will be showing my answer kind of. I think when we think about algorithms and machine learning, we always need a lot of data to be able to put into the system to get more accurate feedback and accurate results from it, or whatever that may be. So that's one component of it. And I think right now we're seeing that, and even when I talked about the impact on marginalized groups, there are definitely going to be different data collection processes across the board when you look at it. So I think first, when we're looking at implementing these technologies, we need to think about kind of like, if we start today, how much data do we want to have? So for example, and I'm just throwing numbers out there, from now until 2030, we're going to be solely collecting data for the purpose of this technology, and think about the types of data we want to collect and how each school would be collecting it. So it would be kind of a top-down process in terms of the guidelines and the process of it. So for example, the government outlines how to do it, and then the school, like, it kind of trickles, I don't want to use that term, it kind of is implemented by the school boards and within the schools as well, to actually implement each of these structures. But there's going to be all kinds of stakeholders involved in it, and collecting the data over maybe like a 10-year period, and then actually building the structure of that algorithm over time and implementing it, starting, for example, in 2030. In terms of the metrics of how we can get the feedback that we want, I don't think I have enough research to really know exactly what we would get out of the programs. But I think as this project kicks off, for example, it will be more of the requirements that are determined at the beginning of it, to think about what kind of metrics we're looking to get out of it, to make sure that we know that the algorithms are working. But if anyone has kind of more insight into that, feel free to like add on to what metrics we could use.
I actually have another question, and I just wanted to start by saying that I really, really enjoyed your presentation too. I thought there were so many really interesting topics, and the one that really stood out for me was when you were kind of talking about how the data is flawed for, these not disproportionate, like these segregated kind of groups in society. And so I was wondering your perspectives. You kind of touched on it a tiny bit, but how could the data be less flawed in that respect?
It just depends on the systems that they're using. And one thing that I see, and this is more so like a very small sample size, but even when you work within one organization, the collection systems that are used and where the data is stored is very fragmented. Sometimes you're storing it in like SAP, and another time it's stored in like a completely different software, and being able to tie them together is often really difficult. So I would say to basically like and if you take cost out of it, just have like a very large scale implementation of like the same type of software that's being used across the board, to make sure that there is similarities between like how everyone is collecting it, and the same data, same types of data, and the same inputs are put into the system as well. And I think part of that also involves not removing the human element of it, but really focusing on how can we automate the processes of data collection, because I think when humans are writing things down or typing things in, a lot of the times it can get very messy. So trying to figure out how to most accurately collect that data would be important, and what can be kind of like drawn all together into this one system. But that's just my thoughts on it. Thanks.
So other questions? So
I like that we now have Ashley's bunny in the video as well. I just wanted to point that out.
So I just wanted to talk about these presentations in general and tell you some comical things you may not have known about the course. Like, you know the song, The Day the Music Died, that has that phrase, the marching band refused to yield? Well, we've been like that sometimes in the past, where the presentations went really long. Somebody else had booked the room at 2 hours after we simply held our ground and told them how important it was that presentations continue. And it's as close as I've come to physical altercations in the workplace, you know. The people never anticipated this, that they'd come to the room and the people in there wouldn't leave. Yeah, but it all turned out fine. But now in the era of Zoom, that of course won't happen. So if you think about the next 3 sessions, so on next Thursday, a week from today, Joel is going first, but there are 4 of you presenting. So the other 3 of you, if you let me know if like you have something right after, and so you can't be the last person or whatever, because I do want to handle that in a way that satisfies everybody. So even though you may say, well, Zoom is not going to cut us off at any time, there's not going to be an external group coming in and challenging us. That's all true, but you all have other things to do. So the 4 of you speaking on a week from today, think about that, what special, you know, considerations there are. And I think that part of the charm of today is I like things that describe what they are doing. Right, like we are experimenting with novel ways of, you know, educating people, right as we're listening to a presentation on that exact subject, you know. So it's just like Leonard Cohen's song Hallelujah, where he actually describes the notes that are being sung, the 4th, the 5th, the minor, you know, that sort of thing. So that's kind of what we're doing. We are reinventing education, even as we talk about reinventing education. So yeah, and so that's kind of cool. I also though want to be, you know, respectful of your time. Like our session today does not have to go 80 minutes. It didn't have to end at 30 minutes, but also doesn't have to go 80 minutes. So, you know, like Taryn has to go. So, yeah.
I don't have by the way, I just found out that I don't have a meeting right after on Thursday, so I can go whenever, and I can stay probably for another hour or 2 afterwards.
Okay, great. Yeah. Yeah, I just want to make the educational process as stress-free as it can be. And I hate the idea that in addition to you guys trying to do a good job in your presentation, you're worried about all sorts of other, you know, extraneous things like us simply running out of time, you know? So anyway, I would prefer if we can avoid those pressures. Yeah.
Ashley, next week when I present, could you bring your rabbit, please? Like I think it's like how do you say when you have a health animal that gives you psychological support? Yeah, so
Right.
they are nice beings, so it's nice to have them around. So
So his name is Casper, first of all. He's a dwarf rabbit, so he won't get any bigger than this. And he's normally running around on the couch, but he's like really cuddly today for some reason, and he won't leave me alone. So that's why he's here today.
excellent. Let's bring them to support our people.
Yeah, but just like your bird, real biological animals are a bit unpredictable. They also have a sort of behavior algorithm with a lot of exceptions and variations, right? They absolutely refuse to appear on camera just because, Eduardo said he really wanted to see the rabbit, but from the rabbit's point of view, it just may not be convenient to be on Zoom.
Exactly.
So yeah. So we have to accept these things.
So next week, is there an order on presentations? Can I be the first one? I think that's my question.
So which day are you? Are you on Tuesday?
The first.
Yeah,
Yes.
the first. Yeah, you can be first unless somebody privately sends me a message that just this urgent thing that makes it much more logical that they be first. That Eduardo's need to be first is only moderate, and their need to be first is like urgent and severe. So yeah. But as of now,
Yeah.
you
I'm
can
okay
go
with you.
first as long as none of the other students intervene with like an overwhelming argument, Yeah. So,
Okay.
yeah. No, that would be fine. Yeah. So
Just want to confirm, like on Tuesday, I believe we will have 2 sessions, one in the morning and then we'll have the afternoon class.
yes.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think there's one other variable which many of you would understand quite well, which is the guy from India who will be speaking. He's had an absolutely unique impact on my life. I mean, if you look at this LABMP classification thing that I'm known for, he sort of put the whole impact of that 30-year process into one graphic, which is really cool. And it's kind of a living graphic that could be, changed and so on moment to moment. So that's really interesting. I have no video of him speaking English, so I don't know how his English is, and we'll just have to deal with it. I mean, that's fine. I just wanted you to know that I know he's a bit nervous about the situation in general, but that could be because you guys are so intellectually intimidating, right? Say, my God, look at the aggregate intellect of those 8 students. It's like amazing, and so maybe that's what he's worried about. Yeah. So anyway, that whole session's a bit unpredictable, and you don't all have to come. Joel said, yeah, Lovebird and Rabbit have more than all of us combined, though. Yeah, that's no, in a way, like there are different kinds of intellect. Yeah, please bring all the pets for all the presentations. I think that would be good. And of course, there's one other pet to think about. That I've gotten a new Sony Aibo robotic dog, and the surprising thing about it is not just how expensive it is, but how heavy it is. You know, there's that song, "He's not heavy, he's my brother." Well, this brother robotic dog is really heavy. So he's much more capable than the two previous robotic dogs that I've had. But also there's a bit of a learning curve programming or getting him completely set up. So if I can do it by next week, then I can also bring him and you can kind of experience a pet from the future kind of thing. But I
I
don't.
actually researched a little bit for this presentation about robo-dogs. I didn't include it because it just did not tie in to everything I was talking about. But it was actually research done out of the U of A talking about how those kind of like robo-dogs could potentially in the future be used to teach kids like empathy and being able to take care of a pet, even, or take care of someone else, even if it isn't like a real pet, real living like dog. But yeah.
Yeah, so like just to answer Kaylin's question, I don't know, about 3,500 US or over 4,000. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an astounding figure. But anyway, we had this $6,000 sitting in an account. And I was told I could do whatever I wanted with it. So, well, then I guess we're going to get the robotic dog. So, yeah, anyway. But I'm going to get a dog because my parents want to, I see, sell their house soon. Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, the other reason you can't get this dog is that Sony is very clear that there is no Canadian market for the dog. I think they're kind of insulted. Back in 2002, when they were selling the Aibo in Canada, nobody bought it. So by 2005, they made it so that you can't get it in Canada. You can't order it from Canada and have it shipped here. You know, you just can't get it. So in 2005, I went to a hotel in the US, waited until this dog came. It was covered with things. Do not forward. If recipient is not there, send it back. So that was the only way I was able to get one in 2005. So anyway, yeah. So, and I don't. It seems to me that sort of aggressive keeping Canadians out is not very smart for Sony, right? Because everybody knows that like Canadians are the coolest people in the world. So why would you want to keep them out of a market of one of your main products? Anyway, I don't know. It's just hard to understand the whole thing. But it doesn't deal with two-factor Wi-Fi. So the dog can't connect to Wi-Fi if you need to identify who you are first and then put in the password. It can only deal with simpler Wi-Fi where there's only a password. So I have to program it at home and so on. It's a bit of a process. Yes, that's probably much more about my pet than you ever want to know. But anyway, no, this is good, bringing pets to our presentations. I'm in favor of that. Any other questions in general about the presentations or the end of the course or the permissions forms that I sent you guys? Politically, for me, those forms are very important because if you all fill them out, then it looks like I totally fit in with the rest of our department's educational system, I'm like following all the rules and complying, and yeah, I just look, I'm a poster boy for, a guy who's really cooperating. So yeah. So anyway, yeah, thank you for those of you who've already sent in the forms. Yep.
I was
So-
just wondering, you kind of talked about the midterm last week, and I know it's pretty early on, but will we get to see our marks or like any feedback on that?
Yes, I expect that Shauna will complete her grading probably by next Tuesday. So I think probably by then I can send you all of your grades and stuff like that. Yeah. So that's my expectation. And now that I've said that, if I don't see any signs of it happening, I can actually communicate with her, because it's about how long it took her to do the midterm last time, the grading of it. And I want to be, respectful. As I said working with her is a little bit like working with a superhero, which is kind of cool. So yeah, anyway. So the parameters are a bit different for a superhero, but still things can happen. And there's also the Clark Kent and Superman aspect, right? So some ways they're just like everybody else, and in other ways not. So yeah, anyway, any other questions? But I mean, what I can tell you, if you just look at the way the courses worked before, think of the students whose raw score on the midterm was like 25 out of 100. Okay, in the past, we scaled things up, right? So if the lowest grade was 25, we'd maybe add 55 points or something to bring them up to kind of a, B- range. Well, but that kind of exam experience is not very satisfying for you, even if the grading outcome isn't that bad. But if you got almost every question wrong, it's not a very good psychological experience. So this is like way better, because like the average student performance overall was much better. And the only area where it was really sort of too good, and I don't really think it's your fault entirely, and that was, the ethics part, where almost all of you got 24 out of 24 on the ethics part of the exam. I'm not used to giving students completely full credit for, I mean, that simply hasn't happened before, where so, but I think in the future we will, diversify, make a bit more heterogeneous that part of the exam, where it won't just be defining things, but also putting those definitions into action and stuff. So it'll be less likely that you could get full marks in that kind of an ethics exam. Yeah, but otherwise I was very happy with both the range of performance and the overall performance for all of you. And I think as Jack Tazinski pointed out, even though if you had 4 days, if you didn't know where to look for the information, you still wouldn't have done very well. So I mean, it was a quite impressive performance for all of you, and it looks good on paper as kind of an advertisement for the course. If you look at one student's, combine all 4 components of the exam, it's kind of an impressive thing to look at. It suggests the students are sort of ready for anything, right? As we said in the Edmonton Journal, Street Smart for the Future. You may not feel you're completely that, but you're getting closer anyway. So, any other questions? Okay, well then, have a good weekend. We'll see at least some of you at 9 a.m. on Tuesday, and then we'll see the rest of you, all of you hopefully, at 2 p.m. on Tuesday for the next set of student presentations. Yeah, so thank you very much for today. I think it's been a good session for all of us. So, and thank you, Leanne, for being brave enough to go first, eh? Yeah, that's something we all appreciate. Okay, well, that's it for today. Thank you very much.